So today I've got something special for you guys. It's an $86 gaming PC. That's right, $86. And not only are we going to get into the performance, but I'm also going to show you how you can get something similar. So let's get into that. Hey, what's up guys? My name is JD from JDTechGear and welcome back to the channel where we discuss PC patch reviews, guides, mods, and more. So if you're into that sort of thing, consider subscribing and checking out the rest of the channel. Alright, so for the parts list, everything came off of eBay. I purchased everything from eBay and everything is based on market price trends, not some crazy once in a lifetime type of deals. No local listings or anything else like that. This is going to be as applicable and as fair and as best as I can make it for everyone. And I also should go without saying that I'm only including what the list price is for all these parts, not what the shipping is, because shipping is going to be different for everyone. It's too much of a variable to include, so I'm only including what that list price is because there's no one price fits all type of scenario. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get into what the actual parts list is. So I picked up a complete PC for 25 bucks. It's a Dell Optiplex 780. These are abundant on eBay and you can pick them up for a pretty low price. Now inside this PC came with an Intel Core 2 Duo dual core processor running at 3 gigahertz. That's the E8400 processor. So it's decent. It's got an okay speed. It's only 2 cores, but it'll do. It also comes with 8 gigs of DDR3 RAM, which I was pretty fortunate to find. It's not incredibly rare, but it will take some time to find that. Also, it includes a 160 gigabyte hard drive. That's not where we'll be keeping the OS on, obviously. For that, I picked up an 80 gigabyte Kingston SSD for 10 bucks, which is another sweet deal. It's used, of course, but it will suffice for what we have here. Windows 10 at least requires 60 gigabytes of space in order to install itself on, so keep that in mind. You can also pick up a used hard drive if you want to expand on your storage. I picked up a Western Digital 1 terabyte green drive that was used for 14 bucks, but I'm not including it in this build because it's not absolutely 100% necessary to make this a full complete gaming system. So the Dell Optiplex 780 came with a little ATI graphics card, but that's not the one that we'll be using. The one we'll be using is the GTX 750 Ti. So this is important. This is a 2 gig card and you can pick these up for around 50 to 60 bucks. I highly recommend not paying anything over $60 US for one of these because then you start entering into the GTX 960 and GTX 77 territory, and that's way better price to performance and way more performance than a 750 Ti. So keep that in mind. Don't pay over $60 or at least try not to. Now the nice thing about the 750 Ti is that it requires no external power source. It draws all its power from the PCIe slot, so you won't have to replace that power supply. Also, another thing to keep in mind is that this is a small form factor PC, so the graphics card will be sticking out, so you have to be okay with that. I'm okay with that. It's an $86 gaming PC. As long as it houses my parts, I'm okay with that. I won't be able to close the side panel, but it does its job. So before we get into the benchmarks, let's go over what the performance settings are. We'll be using optimal settings. I have a video over here that goes more in depth about it in case you guys don't know what it is. But basically it turns down post filtering and anti-aliasing and a couple other game settings that really tax your GPU. Now there's a slight loss in visual quality, but way more FPS. So I think that's a pretty fair trade-off. And all these games will be ran at 1080p, not 720p, because the performance gains really wasn't justifiable enough to justify using 720p over 1080p. So that was kind of interesting to see, but just to get that out there, we're running everything at 1080p. Alright, so the first game up is PUBG, and with optimal low settings, everything pretty much cranked down to its lowest setting. We had an average FPS of 45.4, which is respectable, but a 1% low of 10.8. So yeah, there were some frame dips and stuttering, but that's pretty much going to happen with a dual core processor that's about this age and about 3 gigahertz. So that's going to happen because the 750 Ti wasn't even being fully utilized all the time, and the CPU was pegged at 100%. So there was definitely a bottleneck with the CPU, but still respectable frames at 1080p resolution and could play nonetheless. So overall, quite impressive. The next game is CSGO, which is a CPU bound game, and we ran at optimal high settings and we had an average FPS of 57.7 and a 1% low of 29.9. So yeah, there were still frame dips and drops over here, but it still ran pretty nicely and looked good at the same time. Dropping the settings down to low settings really didn't change the FPS that much, so keeping it at high settings was a pretty nice experience overall. Next is another game that I've been getting into lately. It's called Dungeon Defenders 2, and this was ran at optimal medium settings with an average FPS of 43.1 and a 1% low of 8.5. So yeah, there was some crazy frame dips, But even with my high-end PC that I use personally, I get frame dips just because of the nature of the game. But overall, this game still played pretty well at 43.1 FPS and was playable nonetheless. So the next game we ran was Doom, and we ran it at optimal low settings, and it still looked pretty good at low settings, surprisingly. We had an average FPS of 52.5, which is very respectable, and 1% low of 30.7. So even with those frame dips, we were still at 30 FPS. So this is a very smooth experience, very playable, and overall impressed with this performance. The next game is Battlefield 1, which uses your CPU a lot, and we were running at the lowest settings, and we had an average FPS of 22.1 and a 1% low of 9.3. So pretty much unplayable, but it still played, and even at 720p, it wasn't any better. So that was pretty crazy to see that, but still, technically, you could play the game. It just looked pretty choppy, that's all. So the next game is Fortnite, and we ran it at optimal low settings, and we had an average FPS of 63.6 FPS and a 1% low of 0.2 FPS. And this does not even tell the whole entire story, because it took at least 5 minutes to render in buildings and textures, and it was unplayable for 5 minutes every single round. And on top of that, playing at 720p resolution made absolutely no difference. So if you're patient enough to do that, then go ahead. Otherwise, I would call this an unplayable experience, but this could be due to the recent update for Season 6, I don't know, but just something to keep in mind. Next game is Saints Row 4, which is an older title, I know, and running at optimal low settings, we had an average FPS of 64.6 and a 1% low of 19.3. So a little choppy and stuttery in some areas, but was overall pretty smooth, and it's an open world game, so this was pretty nice to see, and I enjoyed it a lot. Next game is Shadow of Mordor, and we ran at optimal medium settings with an average FPS of 46.8 and a 1% low of 1.8. So there was only a few minor drops in frames actually, so that's where that 1.8 FPS is coming from. But overall, it was pretty smooth all the way throughout. And this is an older title again, but it's also open world, so this is still impressive to me. So I have to give this PC credit where it's due. It's only 86 bucks and we're playing games at 1080p resolution. So honestly, I can't even complain with that. And I'm overall pretty impressed. Now, if you guys want to catch more used GPU reviews and used hardware, I have a playlist right here, as well as some other reviews for your next PC build or for some upgrades. And if you want to help support the channel, which all that goes back into the channel, I do have merch that I'm not wearing. Also some PC canvas art like that to decorate your setup. And if you guys are new here, consider subscribing, checking out the rest of the channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.